Chapter 5. The 10th day after the child's birth, Master Gunnulf said to his brother, when they were alone in the hall in the morning, "Methinks 'tis full time now, Erland, that you sent word to your wife's kin of how things stand with her." "I don't see that there is such haste," answered Herland. "They will scarce be overjoyful at Jorengard when they hear that there is a son in our house already." "Can you believe," said Gunnulf, "that Kristin's mother didn't know in the autumn that her daughter was ailing? And if she knew, then must she now be going in fear?" Erland made no answer. But a little later in the day, as Gunnulf sat in the little hall talking with Kristin, Erland came in. He had a skin cap on his head, a short and thick outer coat of wadmal, long breeches and shaggy boots. He bent over his wife and patted her cheek. "Tell me, my Kristin, would you have me bear any greeting from you to Jorengard? For now am I bound southward to tell them of our son." Kristin flushed deeply. She looked both afraid and glad. "'Tis nothing more than your father has a right to crave of me," said Erland gravely, "that I come myself with these tidings." Kristin lay still a little. "Tell them at home," she said softly, "that I have longed every day, since I left my home, to fall at my father's and mother's feet and pray them for forgiveness." Soon after, Erland left her. Kristin did not think to ask him how he was journeying, but Gunnulf went out with his brother into the courtyard. Outside the hall door stood Erland's ski and a spear-headed staff. "You go on ski?" said Gunnulf. "Who's going with you?" "No one," said Erland, laughing. "You should know best, Gunnulf, that 'tis no easy thing for any to bear me company on ski." "Methinks 'tis folly and rashness," said the priest. "There are many wolves in the Hoyland woods this year, they say." Erland only laughed and began to fasten on his ski. "I shall be up by the Geitskar satyrs, I think, before it's dark. There's a long light already. By evening the third day I should be at Jorengard. 'Tis ill going from Geitskar onto the beaten road, and there are bad fog pockets to pass through. And you know that those satyrs are ill places in winter time." "You can give me your flint and steel," said the other, still laughing, "lest by chance I should have to cast away my own at some elf woman if she should crave such courtesy of me as beseems not a wedded man. Come, brother, now am I to do as you would have me, betake me to Kristin's father and bid him crave such amends from me as he deems fair and right. So far you can sure let me guide myself as to choose how I shall make the journey." With this Master Gunnulf was forced to be content, but he warned the housefolk strictly to keep it hidden from Kristin that Erland had gone forth alone. The southern sky stretched pale yellow over the deepening blue of the mountain snowfields, the evening that Erland rushed down past the Sill churchyard, the snow crust hissing and crunching under his ski. High up rode a half-moon, shining misty white in the evening twilight. At Jorengard, dark smoke was whirling up from the vent holes toward the pale, clear sky. The strokes of an axe rang out, measured and cold through the stillness. From the gateway, a pack of farm dogs rushed out, barking at the newcomer. Inside the courtyard, a flock of shaggy goats were picking their way about, dark in the clear dusk. They were tugging at a heap of pine branches in the midst of the yard. 3 little children in thick winter clothes ran about amongst them. The homely peace of this place took hold on Erland strangely. He stood uneasily and waited for Lavrans, who came out to meet the stranger. He had been standing down by the woodshed talking to a man who was splitting fence staves. He stopped short when he saw it was his son-in-law, thrust the spear he bore in his hand hard down into the snow. "Is it you?" he asked in a low voice. "Alone? Is there anything? How is it you are come in this wise?" he added in a moment. "Thus it is." Erland pulled himself together and looked his father-in-law in the face. "Methought that less I could not do than come myself to bear you these tidings. Kristin bore a son on Mary's Mass in the morning." "Ah, yes, and she's doing well now," he added quickly. Lavrans stood still a while. He set his teeth hard in his under lip, his chin shook and quivered a little. "Oh, these were tidings indeed," he said at last. Little Ranborg had come up and stood at her father's side. She looked up, her face glowing red. "Be still," said Lavrans harshly, so the little maid had not said a word, but only blushed. "Don't stand here. Be gone." He said no more. Erland stood, bent forward, leaning on the staff clenched in his left hand. He looked down at the snow. His right hand was thrust into his breast. Lavrans pointed. "Are you hurt?" "A little," said Erland. "I came over some bare rocks last night in the dark." Lavrans took hold of the wrist and felt it warily. "No bone is broken, I think," he said. "You must tell her mother yourself." He went off towards the hall as Ranfrid came into the yard. She looked in wonderment after her husband, then she knew Erland and went swiftly towards him. She hearkened without a word, while Erland, for the second time, had to bring forth his tidings. But her eyes shone with moisture when he said at the end, "Methought that you had maybe seen somewhat before she left you last autumn, and that you might be fearful now for her." "'Twas kindly done of you, Erland," said she in a voice that shook, "to think of this. True it is that I have been afraid for her every day since you took her from us." Lavrans came back. "Here is Fox's fat. I see your cheek is frozen, son-in-law. You must bide a while in the outer room while Ranfrid dresses it with this and gets you thawed. How are your feet? You must take off your boots that we may see." When the housefolk came in to supper, Lavrans told them the tidings, and bade that strong ale be brought in for them to make merry on. But there was no right merriment over the ale drinking. The master himself sat there with a cup of water. He prayed Erland to forgive this. 'Twas a vow he had made while yet a boy, to drink nothing but water in the fast time. And so the folks sat somewhat soberly, and the talk went but tardily over the good ale. The children would come round to Lavrans now and then. He put an arm round them when they came close to his knee, but he answered absently when they spoke to him. Ranborg answered short and sharply when Erland tried to jest with her, bent, it seemed, on showing that she misliked this brother-in-law of hers. She was in her 8th winter now, lively and comely, but bearing no likeness to her sisters. Erland asked who the other children might be. Lavrans answered that the boy was Havard Tronsson, the youngest of the Sunderbu children. 'Twas dull for him there amid his grown-up brothers and sisters. And last Yule he had set his heart on coming home with Ranfrid, his father's sister. The little maid was Helga Rolfsdatter of Blackasav. There had been nothing for it but for the kinsfolk to take the children away home with them after the grave ale there. To a pity they should see their father as he was now. For Ranborg it was a happy thing to have this foster brother and sister. "We begin to grow old now, Ranfrid and I," said Lavrans, "and this little one is more frolicsome and fond of play than Kristin was." He stroked his daughter's curly hair. Erland went and sat by his mother-in-law, and she asked him of Kristin's childbed. He saw that Lavrans was listening to what they said, but soon he stood up, crossed the room and put on hat and cloak. He had a mind to go over to the parsonage, he said. He would pray Charles Archer to come and drink with them. Lavrans went by the well-trodden path over the fields to Romengard. The moon was dipping behind the hills now, but thousands of stars glittered above the white mountains. He hoped that the priest might be at home. He could bear no longer to sit alone with the others. But when he was come in between the fences near the farm, he saw a little taper coming towards him. Old Audun was bearing it. When he marked that there was someone on his path, he rang his little bell. Lavrans Bjorgelsen threw himself on his knees in the snowdrift by the path. Audun went by bearing the taper, and the bell that still tinkled gently. Behind him came Charles Archer on horseback. He lifted the pyx high in his hands when he came by the kneeling man, looked not to right or left, but rode calmly past, while Lavrans bowed himself down and stretched his two hands up in greeting towards his saviour. It was Einar Hufna's son, the man that was with the priest, so it was drawing to an end with the old man now. Aye, aye. Lavrans said the prayers for the dying before he rose from the snow and went homewards. Even so, this meeting with God in the night had strengthened and comforted him much. "Did you know anything of this? That 'twas so with Kristin?" "Did you not know?" said Ranfrid. "No," answered her husband, so shortly that she understood it must none the less have been in his thoughts at times. "'Tis true, I was afraid while this last summer," said the mother haltingly. I saw that she had no joy in her food, but as time wore on, I thought I must have been deceived. She seemed so joyous all the time we were making ready for the wedding." "Ah, yeah, for that she had good reason," said the father, somewhat grimly. "That she said naught to you, you that are her mother." "Ah, you can remember that, now she has done amiss," answered Ranfrid bitterly. "You know full well, never has Kristin been used to turn to me." In a little while he gently bade his wife sleep well and lay quiet beside her. He felt that sleep would scarce come to him for a long time yet. Kristin, his little maid. Never had he touched with a single word on what Ranfrid had confessed to him that night of the bridal. And she could not with reason think that he had let her feel he thought of it. He had not changed in his bearing towards her. Rather had he striven to show her yet more friendliness and love. 'Twas not the first time this winter that he had marked this bitterness in Ranfrid, or seen her search for some hidden offence in innocent words of his. He didn't understand it, and he knew of no remedy. He must let it be. "O Father, which art in heaven," he prayed for Kristin and her child. Then he prayed for his wife and himself. Last of all he prayed for strength to bear with Erlend Nikolausen in patience of spirit, for so long as he needs must have his son-in-law dwelling on this, his manor. Lavrans would not have his daughter's husband set forth for home till it was seen what turn things would take with his wrist, and he would not hear of Erlend's going back alone. "Kristin would be very joyful if you bore me company," said Erlend one day. Lavrans was silent a while. Then he brought forward many lets and hindrances. Ranfrid would like little to be left alone here on the manor, and should he fare so far north, he could scarce hope to be back for the spring sowings. But the end was that he did set out with Erlend. He took no man with him. He would come back by ship to Raumsdal. He could hire horses to bring him thence down the dale. He had acquaintance everywhere along that road. They spoke not much together on their way, but they journeyed in goodly accord. It tasked Lavrans's strength to keep up with Erland, for he would not own that the other went too fast for him. But Erland soon marked this, and suited his pace to his father-in-law's. He gave himself great pains to please his wife's father, and he had this quiet, compliant way with him when he wished to win the friendship of any. The third night they took shelter in a stone hut. They had had foul weather with mist, but Erland seemed to find the way as surely as ever. Lavrans had marked that Erland had a marvellous sure eye for all signs and marks in the air and on the earth, and for the nature and ways of beasts, and he ever knew where he was. All that he himself, used as he was to the hills, had taught himself by looking and marking and remembering, the other seemed to know blindly. Erland laughed himself about it. He did but feel it all within him. They found the hut in the pitch darkness, at the very hour Erland had foretold. Lavrans thought to himself of a night like this when he had made a bed for himself in the snow, but a bowshot from his own horse camp. The snow was drifted high around the hut, so that they had to break in through the smoke hole. Erland covered over the opening with a horsehide that was lying in the hut, and fastened it with slats of wood which he pressed in under the rafters. He scraped away with a ski the snow that had sifted in, and managed to make up a fire in the fireplace with the frozen wood that lay there. He drew out 3 or 4 ptarmigan from under the bench. He had hid them away there on his way south, plastered them round with clay from the door by the fireplace where it had thawed, and threw the lumps into the glowing embers. Lavrans lay on the earthen bench where Erland had made a couch for him, as well as he could with their wallets and cloaks. "'Tis the fashion the soldiers use with stolen fowls, Erland," said he, laughing. "Yeah, for I learned one thing in another when I was serving the Count," said Erland in the same tone. He was as brisk now and full of life as he had been quiet and almost sluggish at most times his father-in-law had seen him. He began to tell tales, as he sat on the ground in front of the other, of the years when he had served Count Jacob of Halland. He had been troop leader in the castle, and he had cruised about with 3 small ships to guard the coast. Erland's eyes were like a child's now. He did not brag, he but let his tongue run on. Lavrans lay looking down at him. He had prayed God to grant him patience with this husband of his daughter, and now he was well nigh angry with himself that he liked Erland so much better than he had a mind to. He remembered too that night when their church had burned down, he had liked his son-in-law well. 'Twas not in that long carcass of his that Erland lacked manhood. A stab of pain went through the father's heart. 'Twas pity of Erland. He might have been fit for better things than beguiling of women. But as things were, little more had come of all the rest of him than boyish pranks. Had the times been such that a chieftain could have taken this man in hand and used him, but as the world now was, when each man must trust to his own judgment in many things, and a man in Erland's place had in his hands not his welfare only, but so many others, and this was Kristin's husband. Erland looked up at his father-in-law. He too grew grave. Then he said, "One thing would I pray you, Lavrans, before we come to my house, that you would say to me what you must needs have on your heart." Lavrans was silent. "You know well," said Erland as before, "that I will willingly submit me to you in any fashion you may wish, and make such amends as you deem may be a fitting punishment for me." Lavrans looked down into the young man's face. Then he smiled strangely. "That might be a hard matter, Erland, for me to say and for you to do. But at the least you must give fitting gifts to the church at Sundbu, and to the priests, whom you too fooled as well as other folk," he said vehemently. "I will speak of it no more. You cannot blame it on your youth either. More honour had it been to you, Erland, had you confessed and made submission before I made your bridal." "Yes," said Erland, "but I knew not then that things stood so that the wrong I had done you must come to light." Lavrans sat up. Didn't you know when you were wedded that Kristin—" "No," said Erland with a crestfallen look. "We had been wedded nigh on 2 months before I knew it." Lavrans looked at him with some wonder, but said nothing. Then Erland went on, haltingly and weakly. "I'm very glad that you came with me, father-in-law. Kristin has been all this winter so heavy of mood, she has scarce cared to speak a word to me. Many a time has it seemed to me as though she found but little happiness either at Huseby or with me." Lavrans answered somewhat coldly. "'Tis the same, I think, with all young wives. Now she is well once more, doubtless you will soon be as good friends again as you were before," he added, smiling a little mockingly. But Erland sat gazing into the heap of embers. It came over him so surely of a sudden, though truly he had felt it ever since he saw the little red baby face against Kristin's white shoulder. Things would never more be between them as once they had been. When her father came into the little hall where Kristin lay, she sat up in bed and stretched out towards him. She threw her arms around him and wept so sorely that Lavrans was afraid. She had been up for a time, but then she came to know that Erland had gone south over the hills alone, and when time dragged on and he returned not, she grew so fearful that fever came on her, and she must needs lie abed again. It was plain to see that she was weak still. Weeping came on her for never so little things. The new chaplain, Sira Eilif Sirksen, had come to the manor while Erland was away. He had taken it on him to go now and then and sit by the lady of the house and read to her, but she wept at the least thing so causelessly that he scarce knew what he dared let her hear. One day, when her father sat with her, Kristin had set her heart on swaddling the child herself, so that he might see rightly how fair and well-shaped the boy was. As he lay sprawling amidst his swaddling clothes on the coverlid in front of his mother, "What is that mark he has on his breast?" asked Lavrans. Right over his heart the boy had some small blood-red spots. It looked as though a bloody hand had touched him there. Kristin had herself been troubled when first she saw this mark, but she had tried to comfort herself with the reason she now gave. "'Tis but a fire mark, I think. I caught at my breast when I saw the church burning." Her father started. "Ah, aye. True it was that he knew not how long or how much she had kept hidden, and he could not understand how it had been possible for her, his own child, from him. "Methinks you have no right liking for my son," Kristin said to her father many times, and Lavrans laughed and said, nay, he liked him right well. He had brought rich gifts too, to lay both in the cradle and in the lying-in woman's bed. But Kristin deemed that no one truly thought enough of her son, Erland least of all. "Look on him, father," she begged. "See you, he is laughing. Did you ever see so fair a babe as Naqvi, father?" She asked this time and again. Once Lavrans said, as though in thought, "Havard, your brother, our second son, was a passing fair child." In a little Kristin asked in a weak voice, "'Twas he that lived the longest of my brothers?" "Ah, yes, he lived to be 2 winters old." No, now, my Kristin, you must not weep again," he prayed her gently. Neither Lavrans nor Gunnulf Nicolaus liked the boy to be called Naqvi. He was christened Nicolaus. Erland would have it that 'twas the same name, but Gunnulf said no. Sagas told of men called Naqvi back in heathen times, but nothing could bring Erland to use the name his father had borne, and Kristin ever called the boy the name by which Erland had first greeted their son. So to Kristin's mind there was but one in Huseby, besides herself, who fully understood how noble and hopeful a child Naqvi was. This was the new priest, Sira Eilif. In this matter his judgment was scarce less sound than the mother's own. Sire Eilif was a short, spare-limbed man with a little round belly, and this gave him a somewhat laughable look. His presence was unremarkable. Folks who had spoken with him more than once still found it hard to know the priest again, so common was his face. His hair and skin were of the same hue, like reddish-yellow sand, and his round, watery blue eyes were flat with his head. In his bearing he was quiet and retiring, but Master Gunnulf said that Sire Eilif was so learned that he, too, could have passed through all the degrees, had he but had more forwardness. But much more than by learning was he adorned with purity of life, humility, and devout love towards Christ and his church. He was of low kindred, and though he was but little older than Gunnulf Nicolausson, he seemed already not far from an old man. Gunnulf had known him since they went to school together at Nidaros, and he spoke always with great love of Eilif Sirkson. Erland deemed 'twas no great matter of a priest they had gotten for Huseby, but Kristin soon looked on him with trust and love. Kristin still lived down in the little hall with the child, even after she had been churched. 'Twas a heavy day for Kristin that Sire Eilif led her within the church door, but he dared not give her the Lord's body. She had confessed herself to him, but for the sin she had committed, as partner in the guilt of another's unblessed death, she must seek absolution from the Archbishop. That morning, when Gunnulf had sat with her in her soul's agony, he had strictly charged her that, as soon as she was free from danger of bodily death, she must haste to seek healing for her soul. So soon as health and strength enough were hers, she must fulfil her vow to St. Olaf. Now that he, by his intercession, had saved her son and brought him alive and whole to the light and to cleansing baptism, she must walk barefoot to his grave and lay down upon it the golden garland of maidenhood, which she had guarded so ill and borne so wrongfully. And Gunnulf counselled her to prepare herself for this pilgrimage by solitary life, prayers, reading and meditation, also by fasting, but this with due measure, for the sake of the child at her breast. The evening of her churching, when she was sitting sorrowful, Gunnulf had come to her and given her a rosary. He said that in foreign lands 'twas not only cloister folk and priests that used such bead rolls for a help in their pious exercises. This rosary was a most fair one. The beads were of a sort of yellow wood that came from India, and smelt so sweet and delicate that they were well fitted to bring to mind that which a good prayer should be. The heart's sacrifice and yearning for help to live righteously before God. Some among the beads were of amber and gold, and the cross was of a fair enamel. This spring Erland Nicolausson busied himself much with setting his estate in order. This year all fences were mended and gates set up in due time, the ploughing and spring sowing well and early gotten out of hand, and Erland bought some right good horned cattle. He had had to slaughter many at the new year, and 'twas no great loss, so many old and wretched beasts as there had been in his herd. He got together folk for tar burning and birch bark peeling, and the houses of the manor were timbered up and their roofs repaired. There had not been such order at Huseby, folk said, since old Sir Nicolaus was in his full strength. Ay, and 'twas known too that the master sought counsel and help from his wife's father. With him and with his brother, the priest, Erland went about and visited friends and kinsfolk in the country round, when he had leisure from his work. But now he went around in seemly wise, with a few brisk and likely serving men. In former days Erland had used to ride about with a whole troop of unruly hotheads. And so the talk of the countryside, which so long had seethed with wrath over Erland Nicolausson's shameless evil life and shiftless and ruinous husbandry at Huseby, died away now into good-humoured jesting. Folk smiled and said that the young housewife Erland had gotten had brought much to pass in 6 months. A little while before Botolfsmass, Lavrans Bjorgelsson set forth for Nidaros in Master Gunnulf's company. He was to be the priest's guest for some days, while he sought out the shrine of St. Olaf and the other churches in the city, before he journeyed south to his home again. He parted from his daughter and her husband in all love and kindness.